We're starting a brand new series this weekend. One of the things I want to do throughout this series is I would love to interview some of you guys. And that's the scariest thing in the world because really what you're opening up is about your life. And here's the thing, all of us learn from each other. This week we're going to be talking about the pride test, but we're really kind of kicking off the series talking about God has given you a dream. God's given every person in here a dream. It's your calling. He put a calling on your life. But not only has God given you a calling, he's given you a purpose, and that's your destiny. And so we're going to be talking about that because a lot of people live with the dream, but they never actually live the dream. So we're going to talk about how can you live the dream? How can you fulfill the purpose that God has placed on your life? And it's never too late. And we're going to see this in the life of Joseph. So next week, I'm going to be talking about the pit test. You got to pass the pit test. In other words, you're going to be in a pit in some point in your life, and you're going to, maybe you put yourself there, maybe you didn't put yourself there, but what is it God wants you to learn when you're in that pit and you think it's the end of the world? And so if you've got an interesting story and you would like to be interviewed, let me know. I may say, no, we cannot talk about that in front of everybody. But I needed somebody to help break the ice. So I've asked Shannon to come up here this week. And so I'm going to interview her. And we're going to talk about dreams because as I said, God has given every person here a dream. It's your calling. But are you going to live out that dream? Is it going to become your purpose? And so getting to know her, I know her story. And I thought it would be a good way to start this morning as people are coming in. So Shannon, thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
When you were young, well, you're welcome. When you were young, tell us a little bit about your dream. What did you think God was going to do in your life?
When I was 5 years old, I saw a makeup commercial, and I immediately envisioned myself as that girl. I was just like drawn into the TV screen, and I didn't really think at that moment that modeling could be in my future, just the way that I looked. But I had a growth spurt in 7th grade, and I thought, maybe this desire and this dream could become a reality.
And sure enough, you grew, and as you got a little older, some opportunities came up. I think the first one had to do with a 17 magazine contest.
I was actually in a model search. I went to, they have a bunch of agencies, and you do different things. And at the end of the model search, 9 agencies were interested in me, and one really tried to pursue me, Elite in Chicago. I was playing basketball at that time. I was a big AAU basketball person. And I can see now from God's perspective that he showed me that I wasn't quite ready for the industry. They would have eaten me alive. I wasn't strong in my faith. I didn't really know who I was as a person. So he kind of held off and didn't open that door until I won a 17 magazine contest. What's funny is I saw it in a magazine and I was like, oh my gosh. And I had this thought, it was like, you're going to win. And I'm like, I thought my own heart was talking to me, like, I'm really going to win this competition. And then the day of, I kind of gotten lazy and I was like, I don't really feel like driving to Columbus. It was like an hour and a half away. And the Lord used my dad, who wasn't saved, to literally get me there. And long story short, I won. So it was very encouraging to me looking back all these years that the Lord can use an unsaved person to get you to fulfill his purpose for your life. So whatever God has for you, he's going to ultimately want you to get and to have.
And you thought the 17 was a local thing, but it ended up being a national thing.
I won the national competition, and they flew me to New York City, and I was in their magazine. They flew my parents, and it kind of whet my appetite for modeling. I've always loved the camera, and I knew that it was really the Lord, because if he gave me that platform, it would be ultimately to build up his kingdom.
And then, long story short, one day you got a call from somebody named Tyra Banks.
I did. I entered to be on America's Next Top Model. My dad saw a newspaper clipping, and I was like, you know what? Who knows until you try. So I entered it. I was in Wright State at the time, and once again, the Holy Spirit was like, don't pay your next quarter's tuition. You're going to be on it. I'm like, my parents thought I was crazy. I even thought I was crazy, but I ended up getting chosen to be on the show, and so.
That was your very first season.
It was the very first season, yes.
And I know your mom was petrified about you.
She was praying. She's like, Father, I am praying that you would just do something with this desire for her. Oh, Lord, give her a passion for you and a desire. She hated modeling. She was praying her heart out. But when she was praying one time, she felt it with all her might. The Lord tell her, give her to me. She's mine.
So from then on, she just prayed for me, and she was that prayer covering for me constantly, because modeling is a really tough industry. But she released me.
And I know that when we had this conversation last night, you talked about, there is an ego and a pride that goes with being on cover of magazines and being in photo shoots and some of the things that you got to do. But you also saw it as an opportunity for God to use you maybe to impact people. And a few weeks ago, I said, let's watch this show. And I'd like to see you on this show, and you can give me behind the scenes what's really going on. And it was really interesting how, even as, how were you, 18 at the time? Mm-hmm. The stand that you took because you thought this is your opportunity to platform God and be a role model. Just a couple of examples of what happened during that process.
I knew without a shadow of a doubt the Lord opened the door for me to be on America's Next Top Model. There was no other question in my mind. It wasn't anything that I did. It wasn't, he inspired me with what I even sent in to apply. So I knew it was him, and I really wanted to bring him glory. It's never about us. Our lives are truly supposed to bring honor and glory to him and to build up his kingdom, and not, if he gives us a platform, all of us have a platform, it's to ultimately bring him glory. And there was some definite tests on the show. One was they asked us to pose nude, semi-nude. And even though they would give you something partially to wear if you wanted, in the picture you had to simulate nudity. And I knew that no matter how much money or fame I could get from the show or winning, it wasn't worth selling my soul for. So eventually I didn't win the show because I didn't do that shoot.
Yeah, she got down to the final two, and the girl that did the shoot, she won the show. But then even when you got into the modeling career, you were in Australia, you were in New York, you were all over the world modeling. You constantly kind of had a brand. These are things I will not do. And you lost a lot of money because of that.
I did. Yeah, in modeling, they always try to get you to do a little more. So like if you'll do a bathing suit, will you do underwear? If you start doing underwear, will you go topless? If you go topless, will you pose nude? So I had to have non-negotiables in my mind of what I would and wouldn't do, because the money would be offered to me. So I already had in my mind I was committed. I wouldn't do certain things. And I would tell my agent, don't send me to these castings for ABC because I'm not going to do them. So it hurt me in becoming a supermodel because I had limitations of what I would and wouldn't do. But the Lord allowed me to be a great testimony to the other models that I stayed with, the makeup artists and the hairstylists, because they're like, what is it about you? Like, what makes you so strong? I knew it was the Holy Spirit. Like, he can empower us to stand up for ourselves, to not take the money, to not cut corners. And it's truly all him.
I can vouch for that because that's what ruined my modeling career, because I wouldn't pose topless. So
well, there you go.
A lot of people don't know that. But and then I think you were living in Nashville, and you were part of an agency there, and for different reasons, there was a real turn. This dream that you thought God was calling you to, there was a real turn and all of a sudden you found yourself in a totally different situation than modeling. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
I was in Nashville. Yes, I was modeling. I was also battling extreme anxiety that came from some other reasons, another story, another time. But I was really crying out to the Lord because I didn't feel like I had a purpose. I was like tired of the business. It was basically you're judged on what you look like, not if you're honest, if you're dependable, are you on time? So I was just like, Lord, I am so tired. Like, I want some purpose. So my sister just got pregnant, and she lived in North Carolina, and she was like, will you please come and be our nanny? And I'm like, Lord, you want me to leave like modeling, go take care of a newborn? I had been a babysitter before, but not for a newborn. And I surrendered modeling to him. I said, okay, Lord, I'm willing to go through this open door because I know it's from you. And I left modeling, and I was a nanny for my sister, which is also humbling to work for your sister. And I worked for her I watched my nephew for 8 years and my niece for 6 years.
So here you are now. Mm-hmm. But the dream is not necessarily dead. We always talk about the fact God doesn't waste tough times. What do you see God doing with your life now because he still has a dream, he still has a purpose for your life?
I think it's important that we do whatever the Lord asks us to do. And I'm a big dreamer. I think one of the gifts the Lord's given me is faith. I can believe anything. Like, it's not impossible to me. And so that caused a lot of heartbreak in my life. It says in the Bible that hope deferred makes the heart sick. And I was greatly sickened. I was I had much disillusionment of what I thought would be, but what God's will was for my life. And we have to learn to take our desires, our wishes, and to somehow line them up with God's will, because we may want something, but it may not be his will for us. Or maybe he has to teach us some things, because he's not going to give us anything that will destroy us. So if he would have given me some things when I was younger, it would have destroyed me. And he also has to humble us. Like, looking back now, I can see there could have been some pride, because I wasn't going out to the clubs and I wasn't going to doing what all these other models were doing. And he showed me that was because of me, not because of you. So I've just surrendered my life to him. I have no clue what he has in store for me. I am working on a devotional. I've always seen myself speaking and writing books. I had an opportunity to model not too long ago. I didn't apply for it, didn't do anything to pursue it. It was literally all the Lord. And I'm like, Lord, if you open the door for modeling, I truly want you to get all of the glory, because he has resurrection power. His power is the same yesterday, today, and forever. What he did thousands of years ago, he can still do today. And whatever he gives me, I just want to bring him glory.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Would you guys let her know? So we're going to be talking about this in this series, and what is the dream that God has put on your life? We're going to base this on the life of Joseph, and you're going to see that in our series that God gave Joseph a dream when he was 17, and then he stepped into the reality of that dream when he was 30. But in order for Joseph to live the dream that God had for him, he had to go through a bunch of tests. He had to pass a bunch of tests. And I know that excites you right away to think, oh, right, I wanted to have God's will in my life. I don't really want to pass any tests, though. But you're going to have to. If you want to live the dream that God has for you, there are some tests that you're going to have to pass. And I'll just tell you right now, all of these have to do with our character. And I think the number one reason that most of us never experience God's calling in our life, in other words, it never becomes our purpose, it never becomes our destiny, is because we don't pass this test. And so we're going to look at these tests over the next few weeks, and we're going to begin this weekend by looking at the pride test. And we're going to see it in the life of Joseph. And if you're thinking, I don't really need this one, you probably especially need this one this weekend, okay? So let's talk about the pride. But before I jump into the story, I need to give you a little bit of background about Joseph's family. And I'll just tell you, it's kind of like a Jerry Springer episode, okay? Joseph's father was named Jacob, okay? Jacob's the father of this story. Jacob had an uncle named Laban, and he discovered that Laban, and again, this is the Old Testament, I don't write this stuff, I just report it. He discovered that Laban had two daughters. The oldest daughter's name was Leah. The youngest daughter's name was Rachel. Well, Jacob meets Rachel and falls head over heels for Rachel. In fact, let me show you what it says. Genesis chapter 29, verse 17, and I love the Bible. It's just so real. Leah had weak eyes. And you read that and you think, well, that's so sad they didn't have optometrists back then, right? This is literally what the Hebrew says. Leah was hard on the eyes. That's just the Bible keeping it real. She wasn't much to look at. But on the other hand, Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Verse 18, Jacob was in love with Rachel and said to Laban, his uncle, I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel. That was the custom in those days. You didn't get by with just giving a ring. Okay, 7 years, I will work for you. At the end of 7 years, you let me marry Rachel. And I'm sure that Laban was thrilled to get such a great deal for Rachel, but he knows deep down inside, Leah, who also was the oldest daughter, custom said the oldest daughter got first, he knew Leah, I don't know how else to say it, was going to be tough to unload. So this is what Laban does. And Laban like Jacob, remember Jacob was a deceiver. Okay, so is Laban. So Laban came up with this idea that after the wedding, after the reception, when they got to the place where they were going to be the bridal chamber, where they would consummate, he switched out Rachel and he sent in Leah. Now, I'm assuming the bridal chamber was dark. Maybe Jacob was just a little tipsy from the reception. I don't know. But Jacob has a real surprise in store for him when the sun comes out the next day. Because the next day, the sun, and he realizes he has spent his wedding night with Leah. He has consummated his marriage with Leah. And what do you think Jacob was thinking? I can tell you what I was thinking. I'm shooting Laban. Uncle Laban going down, right? He said, you know what? Rachel's worth it. I'll work 7 more years for Rachel. So understand, He's now married to Leah. And while he's married to Leah, ladies, you can think about how this would work out. He's now working 7 more years so he can also marry Rachel. Again, I don't write this stuff, I just report it. During that second 7-year stretch of trying to earn Rachel, him and Leah have 7 children. They have 6 boys. They have 1 girl. Her name was Dinah. I mentioned her because you don't hear much about her anymore, right? But that wasn't enough for Jacob. He also had 2 children with her maid, whose name was Zilpah. Zilpah. So he's got 9. Finally, after 7 years, 14 in total, he finally gets to marry Rachel. But Rachel, they discover, is barren. She can't have children. One of the greatest stigmas a Jewish woman could have. But God miraculously, eventually, at an old age, Jacob's an old man, he allows Rachel to get pregnant. She has a baby boy. His name is Joseph, okay? He's the star of the story, okay? Later on, she has another baby boy. His name is Benjamin. He's the baby in the group. He's going to come into play later on. But that wasn't enough either, so he had 2 more babies with Rachel's maid, who was Bilhah. So think about those. You got Zilpah and you got Bilhah. It's like 2 clowns in the Ringling Brothers circus, right? But in all, he's got 12 sons. 12 sons, and just so you know, these are the 12 sons who end up becoming the 12 tribes of Israel. So now you have the big picture. God pulls this off through Jacob. Now, I also believe having Joseph at an older age, Jacob was very old, is one of the reasons that he probably loved him the way he loved him. And remember, this is the guy, Joseph's the one who got the coat of many colors. He was the favorite son. And it's because when Joseph was born, when Jacob was really old, Jacob felt like, wow, this is a new lease on life. I'm not sure that would have been my response if I'd have been really old and I found out my wife was pregnant, but hey, it worked for Joseph. Or Jacob. So let's pick up the story. Genesis chapter 37, verse 1. It said, Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah, the sons of Zilpah, and his father's wives. And he brought their father a bad report about them. So understand, he hasn't even had any dreams from God yet, but he's already a tattletale. Okay, he's already snitching on his brothers. So keep that in mind. Genesis 37, verse 3. Now Israel. Israel is the same person as Jacob. And you wonder why people can't understand the Bible. God changed Jacob's name to Israel, and you're going to see in this story, they're used interchangeably, okay? So when you ever see Israel, think Jacob, okay? Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. There's the coat of many colors. Maybe some of you saw the musical, right? When his brothers saw that the father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So you got to understand, this is a mixed up family. There's not just brothers, there's stepbrothers, and they're all older than Joseph, right? So understand, as we get into this story, they already hate him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. And when you hear the dream, I'm going to read in just a second, you're going to see how stupid it was for Joseph to share this dream with his older brothers who already hate him because he's daddy's favorite pet, right? So here's the dream. He said to them, listen to the dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. So he's telling these 11 older, stronger brothers this dream, and they hate him. And I think we could all agree it probably wasn't very wise. But before we come down too hard on on Jacob, let's just remember when we were 17. We were all idiots at 17. Now, maybe we look brilliant now, but I'm going to be honest. Most of us are idiots at 17. So let's go a little easy on Joseph. Verse 8, his brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Jacob never learns, okay? Joseph never learns. Listen, he said, I had another dream. And I'm sure his brothers are like, we can't wait to hear it, okay? This time, the sun and the moon, that's mom and dad, and 11 stars, that's the brother, were bowing down to me. When he told his father, as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? Verse 11, his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. And you're going to see he realizes there's a tension there. We'll see that, especially next week as we look at the story. Fast forward now 13 years. Genesis 41, verse 46. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So understand, he was 17 when he had the dream. He was 30 when he began to experience the dream. By the way, as you're going to see in this story, some of these tests that Joseph had to pass, he had to pass all the way up to the age of 45. And I just mentioned that because I want you to realize we're going to deal with tests all of our lives. That's never going to be a part of our history where we say, good, I don't have to do that anymore. It's going to be a part of our lives. And we take these tests because understand, our character is the foundation of our destiny. Whatever purpose, whatever destiny God has for you, your character is the foundation of that destiny. And you will never, ever have a larger destiny than your character can support. And we're going to see that God is a very gracious God, and he gives us multiple opportunities to take the test. But this is why we have the test. Now, I want to lay the foundation for this series by the first point that I gave you, and it's this. God has a dream for you. God has a calling for you. God has a plan for your life. And God's dream for your life, I want you to understand, it's better than the dream that you have for your life. And God's destiny for you is bigger than the destiny that you probably have for your own life. And I could back that up with a lot of verses. I'll just back it up with one biblical truth that you cannot argue with. The reason God's dream is bigger and better than your dream is because God is bigger and better than you. That is just a simple fact of theology. God is bigger, better than you. And so his dream for you is going to be bigger than your dream, and it's going to be better in your dreams. But to live God's dream, it's going to require you to let God go to work in your life and to do the things that he needs to get done in your life. Now, here's the big question. How can you know God's dream for your life? How can you know God's plan? What's his calling for your life? Let me show you an interesting verse. Numbers 12, verse 6, it says this. When there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, reveal myself to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. I love verse 8. With him I speak face to face. Think about that. God says, if I want to get something out to you people, I'll visit someone in a dream, a vision. I'll give them the message to get to you. Moses, when it comes to Moses, me and Moses, we're tight. I speak to him face to face. Let me just keep this very, very simple. If you want to know God's dream for your life, this is the key. Get to know God. See, get to know the giver of the dream. Get to know the one who can not only reveal the dream, get to know the one who can fulfill the dream. One of my favorite verses is Psalm 103, verse 7. It says this, he made known his ways to Moses, his deeds to the people of Israel. What does that mean? He made known his ways to Moses, his deeds to the people of Israel. Well, this is what it means. The people of Israel, they knew what God did. They were aware of the fact that he parted the Red Sea. They were aware of the fact that he supplied manna in the wilderness. They were aware of the fact that God could get water out of the rock. They were aware of his deeds. Moses knew his ways. Do you know what that means? Moses knew why God did what he did. Do you know why? Because they were friends. It reminds me of something Jesus said to the disciples in John 15, verse 15. He said, I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. So my first point is get to know the one who not only reveals the dream, but can fulfill the dream, and that's God. Now, let me just say this, and Shannon kind of alluded to it. Not every dream is from God. We all have dreams in life. Not every dream is from God. For example, we can have selfish dreams. But what happens when we have selfish dreams, it can prevent us from hearing God's dream and experiencing God's dream. That means that we'll probably have some dreams in our life that we're going to have to maybe set aside or lay down before we can ever even hear what God's dream is to us. For example, how many of you guys played football in high school? Okay? Let me just tell you, the Dallas Cowboys are not going to call. All right, so if that's your dream, just put it aside. Okay, now maybe you can hear God's dream. But the reality is, we have these selfish dreams for our life. I want to do this. I want to accomplish this. I want to get married. I want to have this many children. I want to build this business. I want to leave my kids this. Those could be selfish dreams that actually get in the way of us hearing and experiencing God's dream. But the only way you're going to get to know God's dream is by getting to know God. Now, here's the second piece of advice I want to give you out of the story this weekend. as it relates to God's dream for you. And this is where you'd be surprised how you struggle. When you clearly get God's dream and you know it's God's dream, be careful. Don't brag about the dream. Years ago, I had a young man. I didn't know him. My assistant came in. She said, hey, there's a young guy that wants to meet with you. He evidently started a church. It didn't make it. He knows that you started Hope, and it did really well. He wants to meet with you and debrief and see what he can learn from it. The guy came in. He was about 32 years old, sharp young guy. And he told me his story. He told me how God had given him a dream, how he had this vision, how he was going to be this, most incredible pastor that has ever lived, and God was going to fulfill this dream. But then what I found out was he was a part of a church where he was on staff, and he wanted to start a church. So they gave him 150 people and $200,000. And he was out of business in 7 months. The people were gone, and the money was gone. 7 months. And to put that in perspective, I started Hope with 3 families and no money, okay? But he had all that money, but here's the thing. He still had all his pride. He said, this is just a bump in the road. I know what God's going to do. God's going to do this. God's going to do this. God's going to expand his kingdom. God, da, 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 da. So finally I said, listen, this is what I think you need. I said, why don't I find a role here at Hope? We'll bring you on for a couple years, just a couple years. We can kind of pour into you. Maybe you can realize a lot of great people on staff you can learn from. And he said, well, what kind of role? At the time, I thought, well, we need a college pastor. And he was 32 years old. He was married. I thought, you would be really good as a college pastor. And he said, well, if you want me to come on staff with you, I would at least have to have a job on the executive level. And I would need to be an elder at the church. And then he continued to tell me more and more about his dream that God had told him. Don't brag about your dream. Genesis 37:15 says that Joseph's brothers hated him not just because of his dream, but because of his words. They hated him because he bragged about the dream. You're going to bow down to me. Mom and Dad, you're going to bow down to me too. Now again, this is the pride test. And in my opinion, Joseph failed the first test. Now, well, let me say it another way. I don't think he failed it. As I've said before, actually with God, I don't think we ever fail a test. I think we just take it over and over and over again until we pass it. I don't think God gives us a paper back with a big red F on the top. I think it says retake. Retake. I mean, have you ever talked to people? I don't know why I keep going through the same thing over and over and over again. You haven't passed the test. And until you pass the test, you're going to go through it over and over and over. See, that's how gracious God is. I'm not going to flunk you, but we got to get this right. We got to pass the test. Let me give you something. When God put a calling into your life, on your life, he had already factored in your stupidity. You don't think when God put a calling on Abraham's life, he had already factored in Abraham's stupidity? I'm going to sleep with, Sarah's maid, right? David, Moses, he already factors in that you're going to screw up along the way. He understands that. But here's the thing. God knows that. And he's put a dream on your life. Stop bragging about it. Now, here's the big question. Why do we brag? We brag because pride's in our heart. Let me give a couple of verses. Jesus said this in Matthew 12, verse 34. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Don't answer that unless it's Jesus. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, was it Jesus? Oh, anyway, never mind. Boy, wouldn't it be great if Jesus would just call and say, this is really what I want you to do with your life, if you would just write this down. So Jesus said this in Matthew 12:24. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Matthew 15, verse 18. The things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile him. So you could say to me, Mike, you don't know what's in my heart. And I would agree. I don't know everything that's in your heart, but I'll tell you this. If I listen to you talk long enough, I can get a pretty good idea of what's in your heart by the words that come out of your mouth. Understand the reason we brag is because it's in our heart. So we got to deal with what's in our heart because it's going to come out of our mouth. I will tell you this. Pride always has a voice. Pride always wants to be heard. Pride always wants to give its opinion. You know what else pride does? It always interrupts. Do you know why we interrupt? And we're all guilty of this. Do you know why we interrupt when people are talking to us? Because we feel deep down inside what I got to say is much more important than what you have to say. See, it's pride. And we have to deal with the pride or we'll never experience God's dream for us. Let me just show you one more thing about this story that kind of blows my mind. Earlier, I mentioned that Joseph was already trash talking to his father about the brothers before he even had the dream. And then God gives him the dream that his brothers and then his mom and dad, they're all going to bow down to him. I want you to understand something. That dream wasn't Joseph's destiny. In other words, Joseph's purpose on this earth, his destiny on this earth, was not to get his brothers to bow down to him. His purpose was to save millions of people. His purpose was to be second in command. Think about this. Second in command in the most powerful nation on the earth at that time. And to store up enough grain that he literally was going to save multitudes, millions of people from starvation during a famine. That was his purpose. Well, if that's the case, that was his purpose. Here's the question. Why didn't God just give him a dream about saving multitudes? What's the whole bowing down thing? Why didn't he just give him a dream that one day you're going to be in a position where you're going to save millions and millions of people? Well, first of all, maybe it's because that probably is not going to motivate us a whole lot when we're young. I mean, think about it when we were young and we had dreams. What motivates most of us is, I'm going to be well known one day. I'm going to have a lot of power one day. I'm going to be successful one day. I'm going to be filthy rich one day. Those are the kind of dreams we have when we're young. Remember, he's 17 years old. You may have a dream from God. You may have a dream from God that involves you being great. But I will tell you this, being great is not God's dream for your life. Impacting people for his kingdom is always going to be the bottom line. That's going to be God's dream for your life. So I think it's possible that God gave Joseph this dream because he knew that, hey, this dream, probably wouldn't motivate him at this point in his life. So let's talk about people bowing down to you. Another reason, and this may be more accurate, that God may have given Joseph this dream is because this dream revealed what was in his heart. It revealed the pride. And so maybe God is using the dream to work some things out of his life. Maybe God is using your dream to work some things out of your life so that you can fulfill the purpose that God has given you. My point is simply this. The dream that God gives you doesn't necessarily mean that that's the destiny. Sometimes the dream is what starts you on the path to maturity so you can handle the destiny. And Shannon alluded to this. If you can't handle the dream, you can't handle the destiny. In fact, if you can't be humble with the dream, you will never live the dream, because you know what God knows? The dream will destroy you. The dream will destroy you. And so there are times that God gives us a dream just, I think, to get some stuff out of our life. It brings stuff to the surface. It's kind of like when you're purifying gold, you heat it up so the dross comes to the top and you can get rid of it, right? So I think sometimes God gives us a dream because it begins to reveal who we really are. And then he has the opportunity to work on it. So if you're going to move from having a dream to living your dream, first of all, you got to believe that God has a plan for you. Deep down inside, you got to go to bed and wake up every day and say, God, I know you have a calling on my life. What is it? Second, when you get the dream, don't brag about it. Just stay humble. For some reason, God picked you to give that dream to. Here's the third thing, and this is what I want to focus on as we wrap it up. You got to deal with the root of pride. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have dealt with pride at some point in your life? Just raise your hand, okay? How many of you have dealt with it more than once? Raise your hand. Okay. Do you know why we seem to deal with pride so much? It's because we deal with the fruit, but we never quite deal with the root. For example, you may find yourself in conversations, and maybe you notice there's a trend after a while that people keep mentioning, you sound prideful. That sounds prideful to me. And so you get tired of hearing it. And so you decide, I'm just not going to talk as much, right? But here's the problem. The problem with that approach is you may not talk about it, but the pride's still there. It's like, for example, when you don't forgive, you know what unforgiveness turns into? Anger and resentment. And so every time you tell your story, you talk about why you're so angry and the people that hurt you, and they're like, you shouldn't feel that way, and you should forgive them, da, da, da. So what do you decide? I'm just not going to talk about it anymore. Do you know what happens when you suppress anger? It becomes depression. See? You haven't dealt with the root of the issue. In the same way, with pride, we deal with the fruit like, I'm just not going to talk about it anymore. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. And you've dealt with the fruit, but you haven't dealt with the root. We have to deal with the root. What's the root of pride? I'm telling you, the root of all pride is insecurity. Insecurity. Whenever you see a prideful person, I'm telling you, you are witnessing an insecure person. Let me say it another way. If pride is in your heart, insecurity is in your soul. That's where it's coming from. And then to complicate matters even more, Jacques, you can agree with this one. With every new challenge in life comes new insecurities. Let me say it another way. With every new responsibility in life comes new insecurities. I mean, for example, you may just be in your sweet spot. You're selling through life. You're crushing it, right? Then all of a sudden, you get a promotion at work. Or maybe, you get a leadership position at Be Renewed. How heady would that be, right? Right? You know what you start feeling? I should have stayed where I was. I'm not sure I can do this, right? And we get all stressed out. And our insecurity starts to show. And here's the deal. You can't deal with your insecurity by becoming more confident in yourself. Well, I'm just going to do this, because it will result in pride. It will result in pride. You're like, I could do this in my sleep. So you just talk the big, inside you're dying, but you're trying to put together that front. I got this. And we all know people like that. So what do you got to learn? You can't be confident in yourself. Pride. So what you have to do is you have to learn to be more confident in Jesus. That's the difference. I got a situation now where there's a company, and of all companies, a tech company, that has approached me about being a consultant for something that they're going to roll out to churches. And it will not affect my joy that I get out of Be Renewed at all. But it's interesting. I hate consultants. In fact, when I just like, everything in theory, you don't have a clue because you've never done anything, right? So they've asked me to be a consultant. I'm like, okay, God, you do have a sense of humor. And so, and I'm weighing it because honestly, I need the money. And so I'm talking to this guy, but here's what people don't know about me. I got to pastor one of the largest churches in America. And as far as I know, there's only one strength I had in doing that, because that was never a goal. That was never even a thought. It was get good people around you, let them do their job, and stay out of their way. And for some reason, when I took Strength Finder, one of my top gift was woo, winning others over. And so my goal was get right people in the right seat and let them do their job. And if they do their job, I'm going to look really smart. But it's not that I really know that much. I'm not very strategic. I don't know any of those things. And so, in fact, when the church was about 2000, we were building the big building in Raleigh. I went through the deepest depression I have ever gone through in my life. I cried. I could not sleep. I remember when I'd go somewhere, when I was flying back in, I remember one time living in Raleigh. I'm like, I was like, man, I wish the plane would just crash. I don't even want to go back, because the church was about 2,000 people. I had no idea what to do with it. And then I knew we were moving into this new building. We were going to have these financial strains and all these things were going on. I just was trying to find a way out. And so I had a friend who actually was in the church that I pastored in San Francisco. And he had moved back to Northern Virginia before I moved here to start the church. He actually came down for the first weekend we had church. And he was just like a guy I could call. So I called him. He's brilliant. He's he's president of the student body at Clemson, went to Georgia and got his law degree, went to Wharton and got his MBA. He's that kind of guy. In fact, when I finally hired him one time to work at Hope, he was working in the war room in the White House in cybersecurity. So he's a pretty smart guy, but a totally down-to-earth guy. So I called him. I said, man, I got to quit. I'm going to walk away from this. I don't know what to do. I'm so stressed out. And he said, I'm going to be in my car at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'll be in your office by 8:30, and we're going to talk this through. And sure enough, he was down in my office the next day. And he listened to me, whine and complain. And finally, he looked at me and he said, Mike, you know what your problem is? You think the problem is you don't know what to do with this thing in the future. Your problem is you think you knew what you were doing to get it to this point. And he said, you didn't. You need to get your eyes off yourself. You need to put your confidence in God. So in life, we have to get to the place where it's not about us feeling secure and having confidence and giving that impression. It's about, do we find our confidence in God? So when there's insecurity in the heart, you got to deal with it. Do you remember what Jesus said to Satan when Satan was tempting him in the desert? Satan began by saying, if you are the Son of God. Jesus didn't respond by saying, what you talking about, Satan? I am the Son of God. No, he didn't do that. Say, or not am so. That didn't go on, right? Do you know why Jesus didn't respond that way? He knew that he was the Son of God. He's like, I'm just going to let that one go. I'm not even going to address it. I know that I'm the son of God. And I'm telling you, that's how we deal with insecurity. We have to come to the place where we know that we're sons and daughters of God. And that's what deals with our insecurity. Let me just close by telling you a story that maybe will help you figure out how to deal with pride and insecurity. There's a prince looking out the window of his castle one day, and he's looking down and he can see the market, and he sees the most beautiful woman he has ever seen in his life. He cannot get over how beautiful she is. So as he's looking at her, as he's watching her, he's saying, I have got to meet that woman. Now, understand, being the prince, right? He could have just summoned her to the castle and said, you're going to be my next wife, and that would have been it. But he didn't want to do that. He wanted to win her love. So he decided to disguise himself, because she was a peasant, to disguise himself as a peasant. Grew a ragged beard, put on some ragged clothes, left the splendor of the castle, found a boarding house somewhere where he could get a little room, got a job at Chick-fil-A because he promised his mom he'd go to church on Sunday, right, in the marketplace. And he set out looking for this woman. And sure enough, just like in all fairy tales, he finally meets her. And over the course of months, she falls in love with him. He falls in love with her. One day, he finally gets up the nerve to propose, and she accepts. And then after she accepts, he says, I need to tell you something. I really am the prince. And she's blown away. She cannot even begin to comprehend all that he gave up just to find her. And of course, she loves him even more. So they get married, they move into the castle. Not long after that, the king, the prince's dad, passes away. Being the heir to the throne, he becomes the new king. And his new wife goes from being a former peasant to now being the queen. So here's my question. How does she deal with her insecurity? Well, she overcomes her insecurity by remembering who she is. She's the queen. And she knows how much her husband, the king, loves her because of all the sacrifice he went through to get her. That's how she deals with her insecurity. Now, here's the next question. How does she deal with her pride? She remembers where she came from. In the same way, remembering that I am a child of the king deals with my insecurity. Remembering where I came from deals with my pride. I had somebody reach out to me, said they missed me, and I said, well, let's get together sometime. And I responded, I said, one of the things, and it was just a thought I had, I said, one of the things I learned by going through what I went through is that when you do something like that, especially the role I was in, you become the equivalent to having modern day leprosy. I've had people say, I'd love to go to lunch with you, but if someone saw me, I'd love to come to your Bible study, but if the word got out, and it's like just, remember the lepers, how they had to, I don't know if you know it, but in the Old Testament, New Testament, when the lepers walked down the street, they had to yell to everyone approaching them, unclean, unclean, go to the other side of the road, unclean. I said, I appreciate you saying you'd like to get together sometime. But you know what? You can't let your insecurity. You know how you deal with stuff like that? You remember that you're a son or your daughter of God. And then you know what keeps you from being ever prideful again? You remember where you came from. You remember what you're capable of. Listen, God has a dream and a destiny for you. He wants you to live the dream. He wants you to experience the destiny. But you never will. You never will till you pass the pride test. That's all I got.